Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media Webinars. It's great to have you with us for this webinar on water, where our panelists will unpack how to strengthen water supply infrastructure and services. Water security has become one of South Africa's most pressing infrastructure and economic challenges. Aging municipal systems, rising demand, and climate variability are increasingly affecting supply reliability and water quality. This webinar brings together industry specialists and policymakers to examine practical solutions and current developments in the sector. Before we dive into today's conversation, we'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Pragma, Xylem, Endress & Hauser, and Rand Water, for their generous support in making this important conversation possible. Also, just a few quick housekeeping notes. You'll find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please post your questions there at any time. Our panelists will do their best to cover as many as possible during the discussion. The chat is also open for your comments and insights. We encourage you to share your thoughts there. Just remember, though, questions go in the Q&A while conversations go in the chat. The session is being recorded and we'll share the link with you afterwards. We're also streaming live on YouTube, and that link will be posted in the chat once it's available. So with that, let me introduce today's facilitator, Professor Craig Sheridan, who is the director and founder of Wits Water, an interdisciplinary think tank of all things water at Wits University. Craig will be guiding the conversation with our distinguished panel, which includes Dr. Sean Phillips, Director General in the Department of Water and Sanitation, Simon Daba, General Manager of Operations at Rand Water, Dr. Ferial Adam, Executive Manager at WaterCan, and Barney Khosana, Public Sector and Partnership Executive at Pragma. I'll hand over now to our facilitator to continue with the proceedings. Over to you, Craig.
Thanks, Shannon, and good afternoon to everyone out there, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Today's webinar is called Strengthening Water Supply Infrastructure and Services. Often when you think about how do you introduce a topic, it's quite complicated for an engineer to try and speak in English to people. But the reality is that this topic doesn't need a lot of introduction. I think we're all aware that we're continuously experiencing intermittent water supply across both our urban and our rural areas at the moment. So I think with that in mind, there's a series of questions and maybe we can just unpack some of the different strategies and thinking that different role players and sectors have around what this problem is and how do we sort of solve it. So with that, I'd like to go first to Sean, if that's okay with you, Sean. The question for you is, the Water Services Amendment Act introduces stronger national intervention mechanisms in struggling municipalities. Practically, how would these mechanisms operate to improve local water services?
Thank you very much, Craig. Well, the current Water Services Act differentiates between water services authorities and water service providers. And in terms of the current Act, a water services authority, which is the municipality responsible for delivering water services, there's 144 of them in South Africa, is supposed to ensure that the body that actually delivers the service does it according to national norms and standards. But what has happened since the Water Services Act was passed in the late 1990s is that almost all water services authorities have taken on the function using their internal water and sanitation departments to be the water service provider, and they haven't differentiated between the water services authority function and water service provider function, and almost all of them are not actually effectively providing the water services authority function, and the water service provider is not regulated. So the amendment bill, which is currently before Parliament, does a couple of things. Firstly, it provides greater clarity as to what exactly are water services authority functions and what is water service provider functions. And it makes clear, for example, that things like billing and revenue collection are water service provider functions, not water services authority functions, which is also in line with the reforms that National Treasury is pushing with metropolitan municipalities for ring fencing of revenue from the sale of water and creating single point accountability for the water service providers. Then in addition, the bill introduces a concept that all water service providers must have a minimum level of capability, which will be measured by DWS through an operating license system. So if and when the bill is passed, all water service providers will need to apply to DWS to get an operating license, whether they're internal departments in municipalities or external water service providers, including private companies which might want to become water service providers or which are already water service providers. That operating license will be a bit like a driving license when you get a car. It won't be comprehensive, but it'll just give an indication that you've got a minimum level of capability to be a water service provider. And then the bill further indicates that water services authorities can only appoint licensed water service providers, and that if a water services authority has a water service provider which doesn't meet the minimum capability requirements and doesn't show any effort over time to meet the minimum capability requirements, then DWS can issue a directive to the Water Services Authority to go through a local consultation process for the Water Services Authority to appoint an alternative licensed water service provider. And if they don't act on that directive, it provides for the minister to approach a court to get the court to require the Water Services Authority to appoint a licensed water service provider.
Right. I mean, that
Thanks,
sounds,
Craig.
Thanks, Sean. I think that sounds brilliant, especially in the separation of duties, which from like the authority and the service provider. So hopefully that will work. I mean, it would be great if we can actually get that right. Ferial, I'm going to come across to you now and say that WaterCan has championed citizen science as a tool for accountability. How effective has community-led water testing been in prompting municipalities to respond to water quality failures?
Thank you, Craig, and good afternoon to the fellow panelists and all the people listening in. So it depends on a few things. It's not always that we have a positive response from municipalities. It does depend on the kind of relationship municipalities already have with their local communities and how open they are about the work that they're doing. What we find is in areas where they're more confident on their water testing, they're more open about their water quality tests, that actually there's a very nice engagement that actually develops between communities and municipalities. And I'll give you two examples, recent ones. One is, it's still not completely sorted, but in Tulbagh, people were having issues with their drinking water where there was a smell and the color was bad. The municipality was willing to actually go and test water and have a look and try to find sources. The other one was in the Free State, where bloodworms started coming out of tap water. And, together with our team and engaging the municipality, they actually were quite responsive. They went to the area, they shut the water down, they did what they needed to do, and then they do the checks after. But this is not always the case, right? We do have cases where, firstly, municipalities dispute our testing kits, which we say is just an indicator, it's not a lab. And also, we do have the kind of isolated experiences where people are monitoring water or they're talking about water and water to communities that they actually get threatened. And we have a case where in the Eastern Cape people were beaten up. So it's a mixed bag, but I do think what it does do is it does shift the power relationships between people and their municipality. And let's be honest that there's a lack of trust across the country in terms of that relationship. And I think that using our testing kits can be a way of actually building the trust and building that kind of relationship which is needed.
And perhaps that links directly to what Sean said about the license to be the water service provider. That's kind of giving you an indicator of who would be the recipients of licenses fairly easily, as opposed to those who may be the people who don't get their water service provision license at some point, is the way they would engage with what you said. Thank you, Ferial. Simon, I'm going to come across to you now. Bulk water utilities like Rand Water play a critical role in supporting municipalities. What are the biggest operational challenges you currently face in supplying reliable water supply to municipalities, and how are these being addressed?
Good afternoon, Prof. Good afternoon, panelists, and all colleagues who have joined the session. Yes, Rand Water is a bulk water supplier and is governed by Water Services Act, and primarily our supply comes from Valdem, which is part of the integrated Val River system. And of course, our license is from Department of Water and Sanitation, which at this stage, it's a 20-year contract or license, which permits us to abstract approximately 4,380 megaliters per day. And as I say, the permanent license, but we're currently operating on a temporary license, and we abstract by more than 17% of our current license. So that on its own indicates that, we are putting strain on the integrated Val River system, and we know predominantly this water comes from Lesotho. So based on that, we have developed a water use efficiency target for all our customers because we supply water in Gauteng, some parts of Northwest, some parts of Mpumalanga, and some parts of Free State. So coverage says approximately 85% of our water supply is in Gauteng. And there are 3 metros that are taking about 77% of our quantity. With that said, then there are challenges, of course, but as Rand Water, we are based in the Val. That means our water, as we distribute it in the network, one of the critical challenges is reliable energy because our operations are energy intensive. We consume approximately 300 megawatt as an entity. So that's a profound amount of energy that is used in our system. So reliability of energy is critical. And the fact that, when one reads the challenges in the municipal system, as far as the infrastructure is concerned, it's around the issue of water loss. Predominantly, we refer to non-revenue water, but out of non-revenue water, which averages about 40% across all our customers, we have a component which is defined as real or physical losses. And again, for the 3 major metros, it averages around 25%. That's a significant amount of real losses in the system. So our interventions involve quite a number of activities. One, we have to support the municipalities to an extent that the 1% of the tariff fund has been assigned to assist the municipalities with water cycle and water demand management initiatives in an effort to ensure that there can be a reduction of these water losses. And as infrastructure has aged, it is obviously a challenge to deal with the water losses. And this is an area of focus, which, of course, if we are able to reduce at least by 10% from 25% that I mentioned across the metros, you can easily get approximately 400 megaliters per day in the system due to the savings on the water losses. The state of infrastructure is also prone to vandalism, some illegal connections, but there are technologies available to ensure that we are able to deal with these challenges. Thanks, Prof.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I mean, you raised 2 very interesting points. The one is that we all forget about the energy component when we see water coming out of the street, that there's a substantial energy footprint to getting the water, and that's now draining out of a pipe into the ground, and that's lost energy as well. And your points about non-revenue water, especially, linking back to the real and physical losses. I did some back of the envelope calculations. And so, I mean, as an example, Joburg's has approximately 36% water losses, which are non-revenue, which are actually physical losses. But that loss of revenue is roughly the same over 10 years as what the capital requirement Joburg is looking for in sort of 29 billion rand that was in their last budget. So we're in similar orders of magnitude in terms of if we could repair the infrastructure, that revenue comes back quite quickly. And that links back to what Sean was saying about, actually getting the money in and separating out and ring fencing these maintenance budgets. Bonnie, I'm going to come to you now. Recent government interventions in municipal war rooms have prioritized water reticulation infrastructure. What role can improved asset management play in enhancing South Africa's water services?
Thanks, Craig, and to my fellow panelists and the attendees of the webinar. I think, Craig, just thinking about current events, by the time you've got war rooms going, there's a crisis.
Yes.
So just the fact that people are openly speaking about having war rooms indicates that there's a crisis in the water reticulation sector. And if I could cite one of my fellow panelists who I listened to at a conference just yesterday, Dr. Sean Phillips, that state of crisis is actually borne out by the numbers, where of the 144 municipalities he's talked about, if I can quote him, he indicated that about 105, over 70% of them are said to have, critical or poor state, be in a poor state with respect to their water reticulation. So there is indeed a crisis. And he also then spoke about the intended regulations that are coming into place, which are going to result in us having water service providers. And those must have, to achieve their operating licenses, as he indicated, they're going to need basic minimum capabilities. And that's where asset management comes into the picture. At the core of I would hope, at the core of providing any of these water service providers their licenses must be that the asset base is clearly understood, and that is being maintained at a standard that then allows them to apply for those licenses. And we at Pragma, have an assessment that we do. We call it an AMIP. It's an asset management improvement plan. It really it moves you everywhere from the diagnosis of your issue through to sustainable maintenance of your assets. And I would hope that the two work together, where prospective water service providers and their authorities can use some of these processes. And I think I want to emphasize that asset management is not an event, it's a process. It's a continuous, endless process, which puts you in a position where you shouldn't ever be either firefighting or going into war rooms. And so that should then enable these service providers to meet their minimum qualifying criteria, which should then allow them to become certified providers. And then the results of having these self-sufficient water service providers that are run on business principles should in fact become a reality, as we hope.
So, I mean, that's great. I guess, these public-private partnerships are increasingly seen as the solution to municipal capacity constraints. I guess practically, how can partnerships supported by enterprise asset management system and shared technical skills, how can they help to improve water service reliability? It's difficult sometimes working with government as a private entity. So how would that happen in your view?
Craig, again, referring to the conference I've just attended, a lot of the time in that conference was spent speaking about the huge capital investment that's required. Again, citing one of the presenters who from the World Bank spoke about municipalities, either globally and locally, needing about 17 times the amount of funding that they currently spend on maintenance and looking after that infrastructure. So you immediately, they then talk about the need of grant funding from the revenue generated by the municipality, and then of course, commercial funding. That combination of those three forms of funding is really what you're looking for. And they use the term bankable projects. And to link it back to asset management, I would imagine that at the core again of developing the business plans or requests for funding, whether it's grant or commercial funding, at the core of that, you would need to be able to present your asset base as being in the condition that over the life of the term of the loans that you're going to go out and ask for is actually going to be reliable and available, generating the revenue that the city or municipality is going to use to fund. So there's a direct link between the state and useful life of your asset base and your ability then to go into the private sector and propose that they should join you in providing the funding that is required to actually then bring the aging infrastructure that Mr. Baba referred to up to required standard. So you can't run away from your good asset bases and then being the basis upon which you can approach funders for any money to look after your assets.
Yeah, I mean, that links back to a report I read a couple of days, which is that Goldman Sachs is thinking about, they have a new mantra which they're calling Halo Assets, which stands for, and I have to always write this down because I forget it, heavy assets with low obsolescence. And this is around like pivoting away from AI and technology spend, which can disappear in a matter of months, and rather having international systems investing in these types of infrastructures, which don't disappear overnight. They're not a threat from AI revolutions or technological spaces. So there may very well be international interest in these types of things going forwards, as, I mean, people like Goldman Sachs tend to know what they're speaking about. Not always, but in general, they understand financing. But the other thing I was thinking about was I read a different report from the UN University on entering the age of water bankruptcy, which is really around this issue that we're all running out of funds on how to actually manage these water infrastructures, which are exceedingly expensive. And very few societies are well equipped to deal with this problem. So I think your answers speak directly to both of those. Sean, I'm going to come back to you. The next question is, given the growing pressure on water resources, how is the department balancing large infrastructure projects such as dams and bulk schemes with alternative approaches such as reuse and demand management?
Thanks, Craig. From a policy point of view, we strongly support diversifying the water mix, and particularly for urban municipalities, metropolitan municipalities to engage in water reuse, for our coastal cities to start looking at seawater desalination, particularly as it's like the price of water from seawater desalination is likely to come down in future years as the technology is adopted more widely globally. For part of the same issue is also non-revenue water reduction and reduction in losses. That's also much more cost effective than building large new dams. One of the things to consider with many of these ways of diversifying the water mix is that many of them are local in nature. What I mean by that is that if you're going to build a large new dam, for example, it makes sense for it to be done by the national government because you can achieve economies of scale. So that's why the national department builds large dams. It's not our sole national mandate. Municipalities can also build dams, but it's just for economies of scale, it makes sense for the national government to build dams which can serve a number of municipalities and other users. But for these other types of providing water, including groundwater, water reuse, and desalination, they're much more local. It's not really technically feasible to build a groundwater scheme that could supply as much water as a large dam. And water reuse by its nature must be part of the municipal distribution system. So in many respects, we're going to be relying on municipalities, in particular our metropolitan municipalities, to pursue these projects to diversify the water mix and to reduce the amount of water that they need to take from the national water resource systems like the integrated bowl river system. Given that many of the municipalities are financially constrained, particularly in terms of capital, to invest in these things, and also given that many of them, like water reuse, non-revenue water reduction, seawater desalination, almost all of them, they'll have revenue streams associated with them. It's also our view that in that context, it's a very important opportunity for the private sector to become more involved in municipal water and sanitation. And for things like water reuse, non-revenue water projects of replacing pipes and doing other activities to reduce non-revenue water, using capital which the municipalities don't have, and putting in place seawater desalination, all of those things. It makes a lot of sense for municipalities to partner with the private sector, particularly the banks and the pension funds. And by the way, in our engagements with the banks and the pension funds, there's no reluctance to invest in municipal water and sanitation. They're very keen to invest. They indicate that pension funds in other countries often like to invest in an asset class which is called utilities, which is viewed as a safe investment class for pension funds because people will always need water. It's not going to blow the lights out in terms of returns, but it's viewed as a safe long-term investment which can provide reliable, moderate returns, and you're never going to really lose a lot of money because people will always need water. South Africa is unusual in that regard in that we don't really have an investment class of much of an investment class of utilities like in other countries. It's rather small. It's Rand Water and Umgeni Utugela. But apart from that, there isn't much investment in utilities. So I think it's a great opportunity for the money. We do have the money in South Africa. It doesn't have to come from the municipal budgets, and we just need to get the two together, the pension money looking for a place to invest and the opportunities in municipalities to diversify the water mix.
Thanks. And I mean, that's exactly right. These are kind of bespoke solutions in each individual location. And you've partly answered my next question, which is around reliance on municipalities, because the question is, in a number of instances, technical capacity at municipal level appears to be lacking. What plans does government have to strengthen technical capacity? But I guess you've already answered that in saying that, that's about this partnership with the private sector where they can actually sort of subvent or even augment municipal capacity. But I'm putting words in your mouth. Maybe I should rather let you say that, do you have plans to strengthen technical capacity at municipality?
We do offer a lot of support to municipalities. And then, for example, the Municipal Infrastructure Support Agency under the Department of Cooperative Governance has hired more than 100 engineers, which is allocated to municipalities, particularly to the smaller municipalities.
Right.
My assessment is that for the larger municipalities, such as the metropolitan municipalities, their key problem isn't a lack of technical expertise. The key problems are the problems that we talked about earlier. For example, the fact that the revenue from the sale of water is not ring-fenced for the water function, so they're not getting enough budgets to do what they need to do. The fact that municipal councils can and do, given the autonomy of local government, vote for some of the revenues from the sale of water to be allocated to other functions. And the fact that there isn't any single point accountability. So because the aspects of the water function, such as supply chain management, logistics, billing and revenue collection, are scattered across different departments in the municipality, it's very difficult to hold a single person accountable. And given that it's supposed to be run as a financially self-sustaining function, It needs to be run in a business-like way, and you can't really run something in a business-like way if all the different aspects are dispersed across an organization which is focusing on many other different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to thank you, Sean. I'm going to move to Ferial. I mean, I agree with everything you say, Sean. And that's, for me, that is one of our really critical things, is around the funding's not released to do the work it's supposed to be doing. As government considers, for you, Ferial, as government considers partnerships and alternative service delivery models, what safeguards are necessary to ensure that reforms improve service delivery while protecting the constitutional right to safe and accessible water? On mute, Ferial.
There we go. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the safeguards, before we get to safeguards, I just want to mention some of the things that have been mentioned. I was going to bring it in with another question on governance, but I think that for me, the issues around water and sanitation is that it's become so critical that we have to be looking at creative ways of finding solutions and not looking at trying to fix it in the same way. So the same structures, but then just including business will not actually find solutions, in my view. And I know that, I mean, every day I see this. I see that there's a lot of private sector people that are, they kind of, this is going to be the new gold rush in a sense. And my worries are that we don't have the correct safeguards in place. When you talk about what safeguards are necessary to ensure that we still have an improved service, but still have that people have the right of access to water. And so understandably, across from where we're working and the groups we're working with, there are concerns on privatization at the moment. And some people feel like, well, it's a fait accompli that, government's messed up, so hand it over to private sector. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be fixed. If we look at places like the UK, where that has not happened. You've got private sector and the waters, you can't drink the water from the tap, and the canals are all polluted. I think also the whole term of using water bankruptcy takes away the importance of water as a resource and commodifies it. And I think that, for me, even for the UN to use that report doesn't quite adequately deal with the issues around water. But we need to be reminded, and I think Sean always does remind me, that yes, water is a public resource and it is access, its access is in the Constitution. But we need to then just have like a stipulation that it's not a commodity and it cannot be left to market forces. That is my fear in terms of a very unequal country that we live in, that would happen. So I think that any partnerships must be very carefully designed. We cannot have just the kind of partnerships we see where it's PPPs. And let's be honest that this PPP model we have in South Africa has also been open to a lot of corruption. We just need to think of COVID. We need to think of all of these kind of things where these PPPs were not above board. And so, of course, as civil society, we're worried about that. So we're saying that any partnerships and what safeguards need to be in place, there has to be transparency, but not half measures of transparency, real transparency, better controls. There needs to be enforcement on both sides, right? And I think that we must also remember that civil society is not only there when things go wrong. We could also be part of the solutions. And that is something we've been trying to say to many of the new kind of people running for elections now, is that they say, well, once you vote us in, we'll solve the problems. No, you won't, because you've taken 30 years to mess it up. So civil society has grown. We've grown in numbers in terms of how we're watching. So we must not, we must have strong civil society and independent oversight. And that means that we must not have opaque arrangements that just shifts responsibility from government to the private sector and say, well, now you're responsible, clean up this mess. We have to make sure that there's an involvement. Communities can be part of the decision making, and both from people I've spoken to in government and business don't seem to understand that that is happening already. If we look at civil society in Johannesburg and the relationships we have with the utilities like Joburg Water, like the Department of Water and Sanitation, it has strengthened some of the things we've been doing on the ground because of that. So we cannot now exclude that. So communities must be part of it. And I think for me, the key thing is affordable water must be protected. There must be equity. We live in a very unequal country where people till today have to walk kilometers to get water. And I think the one other safeguard that we need to make sure is that we must safeguard against corruption and any procurement abuse, because if we are not careful, if we go into this rushing headfirst, we are opening those doors and we will not be able to turn the tide then on some of the things that people have been talking about in the chat, which is like the water tanker mafia.
Yeah, we don't want another Eskom in the water sector, I guess. But I think you flag a couple of things for me that are really important around the equity issue, not equality. Equity is really important. And your mentioning of the UK, I think, is also particularly important. This is perhaps a privatization model we should not follow, which is to privatize the profit and then nationalize the debt and the losses afterwards when things go wrong. So we need to think about how not to do it that way. Sometimes they do have quite good examples for us to follow or to not follow as we choose. Simon, I'm going to come across to you now, talking about aging distribution networks. Many municipalities have these. How do bulk providers such as Rand Water better coordinate planning and maintenance with the municipalities to reduce losses and improve system performance overall?
Thanks for the question, Prof. Rand Water's relationship with the customers is governed by the water supply agreement or contracts together with the customer charter. So we make commitments that we have to ensure that we supply water as per the contract. Now, one key aspect that really governs the infrastructure to be resilient is the asset management principles. To us, it's not a nice to have. It is a principle that we adopt, which governs the asset management from cradle to grave. So by implementing effective principles of asset management, you are able to know the status of your assets at any given condition, and you are able then to respond. As an example, as Rand Water, we have been faced with the challenge of the non-revenue water. Ours is around 6%. And then we are also having a target of reducing the real losses, which the target is 5%. But I need to report that as we are reporting now, our real losses are around 2%. So we're able to reduce the real losses. These real losses are really associated with the infrastructure out there, where you have to go and fix the infrastructure. We normally undertake our maintenance program during what we define as a low demand period. We know we inconvenience the customers, but we do issue the notices to ensure that we undertake the maintenance to repair the infrastructure so that the infrastructure is able to sustain and meet the requirements of the customers. Referring to asset management principle, most recently, we are in a forum with municipalities and the private stakeholders where discussions are turning around infrastructure asset management. The focus is really to make sure that across the board we implement the best principles of the asset management philosophies, and also to ensure that we do preventative maintenance, because if you adopt this and you tailor-make these philosophies to your situation, you'll be able to reap the results that I'm referring to of reducing the losses. And of course, earlier on, I did indicate that one focus area is reduction of losses, with Rainwater making a commitment to assist municipalities with the water cycle and demand management initiatives. And Rainwater has also, in recent years, re-established Rainwater Services Pty Ltd, which is an entity that will assist municipalities predominantly in areas where there will be some form of establishment of special purpose vehicles, as we are seeing it at Mfuleni. Such initiatives will, to a great extent, assist municipalities in dealing with planning and management of the infrastructure, and of course reduce the losses. And we also have a Rainwater Institute. It's an institute that municipalities can collaborate with for best technologies and also looking around innovations on the infrastructure principles. Thanks, Prof.
Thanks. I mean, in terms of this coordination, one of the things I read, which made me more happy than many things I've read for a long time, was how the Rand Water is already planning and the build is already ongoing for the treatment for when the next phase of Lesotho comes online, so that it's not like step by step, that it's actually all coordinated, that it will all come online simultaneously. So clearly there is coordination happening, which is really good. Burial, I'm coming back to you. Many communities experience unreliable supply but struggle to escalate issues. What gaps of governance currently prevent citizens from holding water services accountable, and how do you think these can be addressed?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit I think most people were talking about in terms of the governance gaps that exist. And just to add, I mean, it's definitely a lack of transparency. I think that at municipal level, if they can, it's unbelievable that they're providing a service to people, but they would rather not engage with people. There's this almost automatic hiding of information, like and we know this, we know that municipalities test their water regularly. Why not put it out there so everyone can see it? It really builds trust. And then, of course, when things go wrong, the responsibility is always shifted around. And the biggest thing that we're seeing is that municipalities in general just ignore people. And those are very big governance gaps that exist in terms of what we're experiencing on the ground and how to address that. I mean, I think that we're finding ways of how do we shift the power relationships. And I must be honest, the citizen science testing kits, yes, they're not a laboratory, they're an indicator test, but it does open the doors, because as much as the testing kits get dismissed, there's curiosity as to how does the science work. So it does create an engagement, and that engagement, just having a municipality actually respond to an email or pick up the phone and say, let's talk. People's tempers just, go away or get calmed. So it really is powerful to have access to information. And what we're finding is that if you're just an individual, some feral Adam somewhere, it's harder to get traction. So we advise for how to make sure that we keep municipalities accountable and use those governance gaps is to have organized groups, whether it's residents associations, community-based organizations, NGOs. There's a whole range of people across in communities. It could be 5 creches that say, listen, we don't have water all the time, but they together. It's not as one. And that shifts it so that it allows you to demand more information. It involves civil society in the solutions, not just for consultation. And then it also shows where things can change. And we've seen this. The truth is that right now, because of the trust deficit that exists between government and people, when government says save water, no one's going to listen. But if you build the relationship with communities, when communities say save water, they will actively go out and do it. So I think that is something where the governance gap leads to not, they don't realize the impact on the ground if they just fix a few things and improve governance, that how the relationship to water changes across the board. And so I think those are important types of things where just fixing basic governance gaps, it's not always about it's corruption or it's mismanagement. It's also fear of how do we deal with an angry community. And sometimes it's just knowledge actually provide the info. We've seen that where the water tanker issue, by the way, in some areas, like in Joburg, during the very bad period last year, it was the people on the ground who were taking photographs of the Joburg water tankers saying, but actually they're filling at this place and they're filling houses. It was through those photographs that we helped Joburg Water keep those water tanker company accountable. So those are the simple things that people can do to make sure that there is some level of governance.
This preempts my next question, which is around transparency, access to credible quality data. But I guess, that's partly what Sean has established as the platform for a water secure Gauteng, which was around getting credible water data into the public domain. And Sean, I applaud you hugely for this initiative, which I would love to say that I've owned and been part of. I've not. I've been part of the sort of advisory committee. But maybe you can comment a little bit on the PWSG as a mechanism for getting credible data that's publicly available into the general space. And then I'll come back to you, Ferial, on that.
Yes, providing the public with credible information is very important. And we just need to look at what Cape Town did when they were facing day zero, and they needed to reduce water consumption in order to put out the date when their dams would become completely dry and they wouldn't have any water to provide to anyone. A major part of their campaign was to provide information available to water users in Cape Town so that people would see that why they're saying what they're saying and understand the figures and the numbers. There was transparency. That's the most important thing. We haven't had that recently in Gauteng with the challenges that we face. There's been a lot of criticism from communities and from the media about the quality of the communication from government, all levels of government, with regard to communication around the water supply challenges which are happening in Gauteng. And we found it difficult to have the same level of transparency and through transparency developing trust with residents so that residents and government can work together to address the problems. As a result of developing that trust, they were very successful in Cape Town. They managed to reduce the average consumption of water per capita markedly, and it stayed that way in Cape Town since. We don't yet have that level of trust in Gauteng. When we do ask citizens in Gauteng to help work with us to reduce the average level of consumption in Gauteng, we often are told that we're blaming citizens for the problems that government is creating, which is an indication that that trust is not yet there.
And I guess it's a slightly different problem. Day zero was affecting everyone all over at the same time equally, whereas the intermittent water supply is it's not for everyone, and it's not all the time, and it's not all over, and it seems to be sort of sporadic. So it's very different to get a coherent thing. Ferial, do you want to respond to that maybe, to Sean's comments? Thanks, Sean.
No, I think I completely agree with Sean. I think that in terms of improving transparency, 9 out of 10 times when we've seen communities on the group, they're angry because they don't have information. And that is, they don't have the full story. And we were joking about this because it's like a broken telephone call, right? So it's, the game, the broken telephone, where the engineer will tell the the middle manager what is going on, and the middle manager now translates this to the comms person, and they're not all looking at each other. So when it comes out to the communities, it's literally gobbledygook, and people don't know what exactly is the problem, and that creates more irritation. And so I think trust is built when people are treated as partners, as you're not just a passive recipient of a service, but you're actually part of the equation. And it's true that people in Joburg, when I think even earlier this year when we were going through the shortages, and Rand Water came out with a statement. Sorry for picking on my colleague here, but Rand Water came out with a statement saying the demand is high, and it's probably true. People need to save. It just fell wrong. It just fell wrong. I mean, it created so much of anger that people were like, we're not going to listen to anything anymore. Because it adds to that mistrust that exists. So, I mean, I think that there has to be a way of finding regular, credible info. And I do think Rand Water also did well on this at times, where I think it was the CEO who came out with videos to say, this is how we're doing the maintenance, this is what's happening, and daily update with very simple English. It helped. It gave people confidence. That doesn't exist. When you just say every single day, when you don't have water for 7 days, and you're seeing the same message that there's a problem with the pipes, we will keep you posted. Oh my word, people want to punch someone. So there has to be some level of not a cut and paste and overly technical kind of communication to build that trust. And honestly, when info is available, it allows residents, civil society to engage constructively with municipalities, but also to create that gap that Sean talks about and speak to the communities we're working with to say, listen, there is a reality that we need to save, even though this is happening. So you can use that civil society voice to kind of work that and build the trust, but it has to come both ways. We can build accountability, and I think that is also important in terms of transparency. It's not only about the communication, but the transparency helps in terms of holding people accountable. And that's the other thing is who gets held accountable when things go wrong? And how do we deal with corruption? And that's why the trust deficit gets bigger and bigger, because people want to see this. And we've been saying to all municipalities we work with, saying, please, initially when we started this work, I remember saying to Sean that we had to submit PIA requests for water quality data. And that should not be the case. People have a right to know the quality of the water that they're drinking. So the culture where protecting water and sanitation services was seen as just government, if we just open up, if we're more transparent, if there's better accountability, it becomes a shared responsibility. So that communities will be more mindful when they see dumping in rivers, or people breaking pipes. They will communicate. Right now, there's like, well, I don't care because government doesn't care. We need to change that narrative.
I totally agree. I'm going to segue a little bit to Bunny now, about procurement processes. And this is something I've also been thinking about quite a lot, how procurement often favors the lowest bidder. Even when we have to get specialized technical expertise. How can governance and procurement frameworks be improved so that municipalities appoint capable service providers, and actually that the best provider is procured, or the best service is procured, rather than the cheapest one? And I think this is going to be particularly important as we go forward into this very large infrastructure spend program where I'm not sure I would want the very cheapest bidder to win on every project if that process is going to be broken in 6 months and we have to do the whole thing again at 3 or 4 times the initial cost. Maybe you could give me some of your thoughts around the procurement side of things.
Certainly, Craig, and I think I'll piggyback off of some of the comments that Dr. Adams and my other fellow panelists made, where the same issues I think translate through into procurement. The having reliable data, trust amongst the parties that are involved often then speaks to coming out with or developing procurement processes that actually are designed to meet the intended outcome, either of the authorities or the providers, and then ultimately society. And I again, I'm making reference to a current conference I attended where I overheard someone from the UK saying that even there globally, his comment, and if I can paraphrase, he said, we're using 1980s procurement regulations to come and do procurement in the 21st century. And their reference was being made to the asymmetry between the fact that modern service providers are often coming with platforms. These are as a service offerings that are usually well designed to or intended or structured to have revenue share and risk share type of models built into them, whereas on the other side, the tendency is to have very much fixed scope, fixed price, compliance-based types of procurement processes that end up often resulting in the most competent or capable providers seeing very high risk, because often these a lot of our procurement processes involve the passing of a lot of the risk to the provider, saying that once I appoint you as the nominated provider, all the risk effectively shifts to you. The result there is that providers then add on risk margin from a price point of view, because firstly the definition and scope of what is being looked for is often not quite is either too loosely or too tightly defined, and depending on what that is, you will make adjustments to say, I've understood about 60 or 70% of the requirement, and therefore I'll add 40% risk margin to my pricing. I think I was encouraged when Mr. Klaba indicated, and I'm publicly saying I'll definitely attempt to reach out to him. He spoke of fora where Rand Water meets with private sector entities, whether that's academia and certainly the likes of ourselves. I think those are safe spaces where you can respect the prescripts of the PFMA, the Public Finance Management Act, or the MFMA, but also get the opportunity to sit with the ultimate buyer in a neutral setting, where you can then share what types of offerings there are out there as private sector providers, and those can then be inputs that can feed into well-crafted, well-defined procurement requirements without, as I said, compromising yourself, and in that a Pragma was seen sitting with Rand Water for lengthy periods of time, and then later on when they win the RFP, it's associated with nefarious activities. Let's create spaces where public and private sector engagements and as well as civil society can sit around, have these discussions, much like we're doing right now, and those then become feeder inputs. And then, as was indicated by Dr. Phillips, once you start talking about service providers, we can think of models where absolutely, if government is going to be issuing performance-based grants, as was indicated by the president and in the next regulation, I think that should also move into the procurement processes, where you say, well, let's come up with performance-based compensation models that say you share the risk, you share some of the cost, and therefore you'll get the opportunity to share in the benefits, whether that be revenue or cost saving, etc. So I think that, just to summarize my point, it's really to say, if there can be modernization of the entire procurement process that is aligned with the intended outcomes, we can end up with a working system.
Yeah, absolutely. A colleague of mine here at Wits in the Faculty of Law has been looking at green procurement and just how difficult it is to procure, for instance, bamboo instead of polystyrene things in these types of spaces, specifically because this procurement policy is often sitting in the 1980s, and it drills down at what's the cheapest thing, and there's absolutely no consideration of 21st century inputs into the procurement of whatever the widget is that you're buying. So I think that's very interesting. Simon, I've got a couple of questions for you. The first is, I sort of vaguely alluded to it, but with the increasing water demand in Gauteng, what infrastructure upgrades or new supply schemes are being prioritized to ensure long-term security of supply? Maybe you can share some of your thinking about the future. The future is very important for me and also a little scary, because if we look forward to the next 30 or 40 or 50 years, I think whatever projections you use, we're in quite serious trouble. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on those next 40, or maybe we can start with 5 years and then move to 40 years.
Thank you. Thanks, Prof. Firstly, I need to touch on the current to indicate that our abstraction license is really controlled in a manner that we don't have unlimited raw water source. So hence, this license gets reviewed periodically by Department of Water and Sanitation, and they will then advise. As we are currently operating with a temporary license, it will be reviewed in June. It will be also June this year, and it will also be reviewed by end of September this year. So the indication is that our license for phase 2 of Lesotho, we are ready, as I indicated earlier on, that we are having an integrated asset management principles which look into 20-year horizon. So based on the 5-year horizon, we already have infrastructure on the ground, which we call System 5A. It's ready with 600 megaliters per day to respond to phase 2 of Lesotho. And over and above that, we are also preparing for the next phase, which we then call it Station 5B, additional 600 megaliters per day, which will be built next to our existing or recently completed 600 megaliter per day facility. So we have 20-year horizon focus, and we also have a 5-year focus. On a 5-year focus, we have commitment of spending approximately 30 billion rand in the next 5 years for various infrastructures that will be building. But I know most of the time it becomes very visible when we say we'll be building approximately 12 reservoirs, and our reservoirs are huge. In the next 5 years or so, we'll start seeing reservoirs being built, new pipelines. We already have a new engine room. So the infrastructure is being built, and we are not only focusing on the new infrastructure, we are also having a focus on our renewal, where we also replace the old infrastructure with the new infrastructure. And that then really says our readiness is there in the long term, but we are also mindful of the fact that raw water source is one of the factors that needs to be taken into consideration. And as Rainwater, we also don't rely on grants from government. We are self-funded, but of course we face a lot of debts from the municipalities. It's one of the challenges that can really make us face challenges in terms of infrastructure development. But there are, however, some number of interventions that are concerted into ensuring that, the customers honor their bill over and above, reducing their losses so that they are able to pay the services that Rainwater is offering. So we do have a long-term focus, which of course also looks into what we call strategic growth unit, where we are looking at alternatives in terms of alternative raw water sources, as well as the alternative energy. Those colleagues who are out there in the market will have seen that we have a number of initiatives that are in the market to respond to some of the alternatives that are out there. Thank you.
So, I mean, that's great. I guess that leads to the next question, which was around how you support initiatives that look at water reuse and demand management. But I guess I'm quite interested in for instance, if a mining company is going to remediate their mine water to potable limit, for example, how does that intersect with what you do? Are you in a position to support them, inject that into your systems, or would they have to go to local municipalities? How do we support independent water producers to get their water to people, which can then alleviate some of the strain on your systems?
Yes, thanks, Prof. We have actually concluded a number of memorandum of understanding with various municipalities where we are looking at reclamation of water from wastewater treatment plants, because those plants are critical. They produce quite a number of huge quantity of water that if it's reclaimed, it can be used for various purposes. So one of the initiatives is really around reclamation. We're also looking at boreholes. All these initiatives have been to the market, and then processes are underway to really make them to be practical. That's initiatives that we are looking at, Prof. And over and above that, as I said, we are working closely with the municipalities to ensure the reduction of non-revenue water. And we also have our rainwater services that is focusing on the establishment of the special purpose vehicles. We do interact, for instance, some of the municipalities have their own drinking water plants, and we get involved to assist them. One, to ensure that, they optimize the plants, they operate in a manner that, can also result in the reduction of water consumption from our system. Classical example is the current working relationship that Rainwater has with the City of Tshwane, where we are working together on the two of their water drinking plants to ensure that, they achieve the standard that they need to achieve. But we know the challenge in the network is also the effluent that comes from the wastewater treatment plants. So wastewater treatment plants really need to be optimized and operate within the parameters of the effluent that they need to discharge, so that that water can be reclaimed appropriately for various uses. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's not the Department of Water, it's the Department of Water and Sanitation, and that little sister, the S, is the one that's really, a big headache for all of us, I think. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think sanitation is another one of our big challenges, which we haven't really had time to touch on today. I'm going to ask one last question before we open up for questions, because we are getting towards the end of our time. It's to Barney, and it's around things like life cycle planning and asset registers and scheduled maintenance. Maybe it's an obvious question, but how important are these things in restoring service delivery?
Craig, they're absolutely important, and as I mentioned earlier, when you talk about you spoke of these halo assets that you talk about, that you mentioned. These are very asset intensive or capital intensive investments. They last an extremely long period of time, and there's a well-known adage that if you fail to plan, you're unconsciously planning to fail. So that's, I think, at the heart of what we're talking about when we talk about life cycle management. I spoke of the financial models that are used to fund this capital investment. And at the heart of them is an assumption that the assets at the core that are being funded are going to last for their useful life. They all have remaining useful life. We spoke that we're engineers, so we use those terms. And that you have to make sure that these assets last for their full lifetime. And as we saw in the case of a Coburg, you can actually at the end of those lifetimes extend them by as long as 20 and 30 years if you've done that. So those principles are what should inform what we call the life cycle management. I mentioned again also at the beginning that maintenance it's not an event, it's a process. It's an ongoing process. You do it in your house with your own personal assets. There's no point at which there should ever be a negligence of maintenance. And so the direct link of reliable assets being available to you is key to them continuing. And I think we need to look holistically. I think it's a theme that's run through the responses of my fellow panelists, that you must think about the people involved, whether that be the communities as well as the technical people. So training and increasing the knowledge around the importance of maintenance is very key. And then, of course, you've got the well-established processes. There are ISO standards like ISO 55000 that go into great detail around how maintenance should be done as a best practice. And obviously, you will have variations for your own local environment. But yes, those are there. And then, of course, you've got the technologies. We've mentioned that there's a lot of data and information related with the infrastructure that we're speaking about. There are, our well-developed cloud and on-premise platforms that are designed to hold that data. And of course, we can't forget the current buzzword, which is, AI-enabled predictive maintenance. Those are tool sets that, if correctly used, can really provide insight that supplements the extensive human knowledge that's out there. So planning for assets across their life cycle is central to them being available to achieving the outcomes that both government and the public would intend for these assets.
Thanks. Your point on maintenance is super interesting. I was discussing this with my students the other day, and I used my car as an example, that I have to take it for a service once a year. And I spend, I don't know, a few thousand rand, and I get my same car back, and there's nothing different. And all I've got is a loss of money for the same thing that you can't see anything around it. So that's part of the issue with maintenance, is it's actually not a sexy spend ever. But the reality is it's something we've got to do. I'm going to go into the questions quickly. We've got time and space. So firstly, thank you all. I'll come back to all of you, but there are a couple of questions that maybe we can answer. The first one is from Stephen Miska. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Do the metering and telemetry systems have sufficient granularity so that leakage points can be readily alarmed and identified for high priority repairs? But not only at the municipal level. I'm not quite sure who that question should go to, but I think that's quite a good question. Maybe to Simon or to Bunny or to Sean.
I'm happy to. Oh no, sorry. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. Thanks, Bunny. Mine will be practically from Rendota's perspective. We do undertake condition assessment, and there are various technologies available real time to assess leaks in the system, and obviously responding to those leaks is based on the outcome of the condition assessment using various technologies. And technologies have also advanced to an extent that if you're fixing a leak, there are means, as you will know, that our pipelines operate at very high pressure, but there are technologies out there that can assist to ensure that we fix the leaks without taking the system off, sort of in situ repair of the leak. So yes, technologies are available to predict failures also on the other type of infrastructure, such as pump sets. We are able to tell that, I need to intervene with proactive maintenance, not to experience a situation where infrastructure fails for you to respond, be more reactive to it than being proactive. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to go, Bunny, or shall we go to the
Yes,
next
I think
question?
I'll be quick and indicate that again in discussions, often when there's no doubt, as Mr. Kaba has indicated, that the technology, whether it's IoT technology, is out there to give you the most granular data that you want. But equally, the cost of lots of data can be noise in the system. And so I think one of the key things that I would want to suggest is something that has been spoken about, where I've heard of both in the Netherlands and Belgium, where they've done extensive work in trying to develop what they call common information models that all of the entities that across the value chains that use the data that is generated out of these systems has common ways of referring to the data. There is clarity around what that data is referring to in the asset base and how it's called, so that information can then move through a system. And as soon as there are alerts or breaches of thresholds, everyone in that system knows and understands what was going on. Perhaps, as Mr. Tlaba indicated, that there are perhaps scheduled maintenance that drops maybe water pressure either in a pipe or a dam. That shouldn't trigger an alert somewhere simply because somebody unknowingly then sees that as a burst pipe or misinterprets that piece of data. So along with having the means of acquiring granular data, let's equally also have shared information models that can help the appropriate response to be taken when these events happen.
A critical point, the difference between data and information. Yeah. There's one other question then that I'm going to go through, and maybe this one is to Sean. Why not implement a water vendor license for suppliers that serve the water industry? It goes without saying that with the list of qualified, responsible, and reputable suppliers, factors like corruption and substandard delivery could largely be eliminated. That could by itself go a long way to protect and safeguard the resource. Would that make sense or not so much in your opinion, Sean?
Well, it could assist, but we've got more urgent priorities at the moment, which is, for example, the operating license for the water service providers.
Yeah.
Something like that could come in future. For certain types of suppliers, there could be strong arguments for professionalization and for suppliers to have some kind of professional associations, and for them to and then government can use membership criteria of those professional associations or industry associations as a requirement to be eligible to bid. Craig, can I just also mention something about the previous issue?
Yeah.
So ideally, a municipality should have enough data about its water distribution system to know where the leaks are, and also to be able to know at which points the largest leaks are happening, so they can be strategic in their leak repairs. But there is a risk. In some municipalities, the municipalities don't even have the capacity to repair the leaks. And there's a risk that municipalities might waste money on sophisticated leak detection technologies when getting that data on where all the leaks are doesn't really help if you haven't got the ability to go out to fix the leaks in the first place. So those kind of things are useful in municipalities which have the basics in place. But if they're sold to a municipality which doesn't have the basics in place, it can be wasteful expenditure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so we're almost out of time. So I'm going to go through the panel and just see if you guys have any last points that you'd like to make. And I'm going to go in reverse order this time. So Bonnie, maybe if you've got a last point that you'd like to share with everyone.
Yeah, I think thanks, Craig. I think the point that I'd like to leave everyone with is that maintenance and maintenance management I think it's just part and parcel of human life. There's a lot of knowledge and institutional knowledge available to us, and then now supplemented with platforms like AI and that can do a lot of the heavy lifting from a compute point of view. Those systems are well established. And if it's very much about the discipline of following those well-defined processes, and obviously innovating around them for our local needs and conditions, but following those almost the same way you would a recipe often will result in exponential benefits. In the same way that you spoke of the discipline of following when your car indicates that please take your car in for a service, within the next 2,000 kilometers. When you do so, you will have the effect that you had where you won't have problems. And in fact, the best thing is that nothing happens or nothing breaks. That's really the best outcome. And if we can extend that into our public infrastructure, we will be well on the way to developing and achieving the country that we would like.
Thank you. That's great. Simon, any last words from you for the audience?
Prof, I saw a question around the alternatives to chemical treatment processes. I just want to say Rendotter is always embracing finding the new ways of doing things. So we are open for any discussions. We do have accredited scientific services unit that explores all different options to consider different ways of water treatment chemicals. So we are available and we can engage on any proposals that are put to us for such initiatives. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to remember that too. And then our next participant who was second on our list was Ferial. So you're in the next. Have you got any last words?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Craig, and all the panelists. I mean, I think from listening to the discussions, it's very clear for me that, and we need to remember that there is no quick fix for what is going on. Sean he's written previously about 73% of our water service providers or municipalities that are not coping with providing basic water and sanitation services. And we must always think of water and sanitation. And I also think that we cannot move to the point where we think that we just cut municipalities out of the equation and just give it to the private sector to deal with. I think that may not be the solution. And I want to repeat again, is that trying to find the solutions for the kind of 30-year or maybe longer problems we have right now cannot use the same thinking that got us into this mess in the first place. So I think that we need to think about how we change our systems. We need municipalities. I don't want to write them off because there is a point to them and they have a role to play. How we work, that is important. And also through all of these discussions and comments that came on, a lot of it was about the business side, about how do I get this procurement? How do I get that? And I think at the end of the day, for me, is to realize that there are still millions and millions of South Africans that don't have access to clean, safe drinking water and sanitation. And that for me means that there has to be it has to be an equity issue. We have to remember that when we're doing this, it's not to just create enclosures of estates that don't have to worry about the rest of the world. It's not the same like energy. It's not the same like when we had load shedding. It's a different. Water systems are very different. And so we need to realize that when we're dealing with water, we cannot have the same mindset that we had with power. We cannot close ourselves off. We have to work with this together to fix it. That for me is my concern. Thank you.
Thanks, Beryl. And then finally over to you, Sean, for the last take-home message or comment.
Thank you very much. It's quite interesting. There's quite a lot of the questions that I was answering in the question and answer box, which were agreeing that the key problem in South Africa, the biggest challenges lie with municipal water distribution. But many of the questions were asking, why doesn't national government intervene in municipalities? And why doesn't national government make municipalities do this or the other? When in reality, the Constitution doesn't allow national government to do that.
Yeah.
We have three spheres of government, and local government is a separate sphere with its own elected representatives. And I think we need to have more debate around this in society. It's a fundamental part of this issue, and if people keep expecting that the solution is for national government to make municipalities do things when national government doesn't have the legal power to do that, then we're not going to move forward because it's not a viable solution. I think also people need to hold their municipalities to account. Inevitably, the power to get municipalities to change lies with the electorate who vote for municipal leaders. And that needs to be more recognized. So part of the solution to the problems is in people's hands. Because it's people's municipalities. It's not the national government's municipalities. That the municipalities of the local people, and they need to take ownership of the municipalities and work with their municipalities to solve the issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Exactly. I can't agree more. It's around democracy and around using democracy to actually get the change we want. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I'm now going to hand over back to Shannon, and she can say the final farewell to everyone on the webinar.
Thank you very much, Craig. Wow, I've learned a lot. I think I'll watch the recording again because that was just fascinating. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. That does bring us to the end of today's discussion. First of all, a big thank you to our facilitator, Professor Craig Sheridan from Witwatersrand, and to our very informative panelists, Dr. Sean Phillips from the Department of Water and Sanitation, Simon Raba from Rand Water, Dr. Ferial Adam from WaterCan, and Barney Krosana from Pragma for sharing their insights. Thank you also to all of the attendees for joining us and contributing through your questions and comments. We'd also like to once again thank our sponsors, Pragma, Xylem, Endress & Hauser, and Rand Water for making this webinar possible. The recording of today's session will be shared soon, so keep your eye out for that email. We'd also like to invite you to join us for our next webinar on the 25th of March at 2 p.m. It will focus on gas. You'll find the registration link in the chat. And if you'd like to stay up to date with our upcoming webinars and news, be sure to sign up for our free daily newsletter or visit our website. You can also reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. From all of us at Creamer Media Webinars, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.